Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here. I got another Master Duel video for you all today. So, a few videos ago, I believe it was during my Tearlaments deck profile for Season 17, I briefly kind of threw out the question of like, when I was going through my deck collection of, hey, would you all be interested in seeing it? I know I've shown off my deck collections before in past videos, and people seemed to like that last time, and I saw a couple people asking about particular lists or just generally saying that they would like to see the list. So I decided that, yeah, I'd go ahead and dedicate a video to go ahead and showing them all off. Particularly one of the reasons I went through and rebuilt pretty much not even pretty much, it was literally every single deck in my collection, is to make sure that they were all geared for the current Tearlament meta. I like to do this whenever there are just general major meta shifts. I'll go through, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I delete every single deck I have and then just rebuild them all from scratch. A lot of the time, they don't end up looking like too different, maybe just a couple of cards difference, but it's just my own deck building process. I really like just completely working with a clean slate and thinking about, rather than just replacing, like, okay, what can I take out for something that's good for the meta, just like rebuilding from scratch and like, how can we completely form this deck for the new meta? So I'm going to hop over here to my deck collection, and as you can see, I've got 29, not quite a full 30. I actually like having 29 out of 30. At any given time, I like leaving the last slot open, just in case I get like a new idea for a deck, or just the urge to try something new. I can always just have the option to go ahead and build a new one. I don't know. I know it doesn't really make a difference. Like, you can just delete a deck that you're not using and then just make a new one anyway, but it's just how I like to operate. So the way I kind of have these sorted is I have more meta relevant ones, or like more upper tier meta decks, like more towards the top, and then decks that I either feel are a little bit less meta relevant, but still rogue, still definitely good, or ones that I'm less interested in down here towards the bottom. So I'm actually going to work my way from the bottom up, and as you can see here, I have quite a variety of decks. Even if there's not a particular deck here that you're interested in seeing, there's definitely one that's going to be at least like somewhat adjacent to it. I have a wide variety of strategies represented here. So, like I said, we're going to start from the bottom with DDDs. This deck hasn't really... Oh yeah, I actually recently went through and took out some of my glossy supers in order to get some more crafting materials. So you might see that message pop up a couple of times, but I should have everything for all the lists here. But in any case, DDDs is what I have here at the bottom. And the reason I have this at the bottom is that this is one of those decks that isn't really very malleable at all when it comes to particular metas. Like, I managed to sneak in one DD Crow in a tech slot here, which I honestly thought could maybe even be a triple tack as well, but so much of the main deck and the entire extra deck is just completely dedicated to this stuff you have to combo into, that it's really hard for DDDs to adjust meta by meta, which is one of the reasons why they're kind of like eternally locked in Rogue, right? There's, again, so much of their strategy, so much of their main deck, rather, just is so focused on their one strategy, their one combo line, they sometimes have a more difficult time keeping up. But this is, I think, just about the only like dedicated Pendulum deck I've played so far in Master Duel. It's one I like a lot. I think it's really cool, and Reggie, the character who used this in the show, was one of my favorite characters across like the Yu-Gi-Oh anime. I actually really liked Arc V, and I really liked Reggie in Arc V. So yeah, I really like DDDs here, even if though they haven't always been super great, but particularly in this meta, they just have a hard time keeping up. Alright, next we have Skull Servant. This is definitely more at the bottom of the end, the scale here, less because I don't like it, but more because it's just not very relevant to the meta. But Skull Servant is a deck that I've featured once on the channel, and every now and then I'll play for laughs. The problem with Skull Servant, though, is that it's a very graveyard-based deck, and this is obviously a meta where if you're not playing Tearlaments, you're playing, and even if you are playing Tearlaments, you're still playing a significant amount of graveyard hate. So, as a result, Skull Servant has a really difficult time in this meta, because of like the Ishizu Shufflers being everywhere, because of Abyss Dweller being everywhere, because of people playing stuff like Dimensional Shifter, D-Fissure, and a bunch of other techs that we'll see across decks coming up later in this video. Graveyard decks, like I said, tend to have a really hard time, but this is, I think, a pretty optimized Skull Servant list for Master Duel. I should have played this deck more, honestly, when we had the Ishizus, but before we had Tiers. It was kind of a missed opportunity there, but I might still bust it out if you like really want to see a video dedicated to Skull Servant. Definitely let me know, and maybe once I hit Diamond 1, we'll go ahead and try for that. Alright, so let's see. Salamangreat is going to be the next deck we have here. Salads are a deck that, I like a decent bit, but I honestly do find their playstyle to be a little bit boring. Mathmex did certainly mix it up a little bit. Of course, Mathmex can be supplemented into pretty much any given Cybers deck, and they can form an engine. It's like, I saw a meme recently that was like, any Cybers comes out, and it's like, is that new Mathmex support? It's like, it can go the other way too, where, again, Mathmex can slide pretty nicely into Cybers decks. Salamangreat is Salamangreat, it's still pretty much doing the same stuff. I usually winning the game through something like Update Gem or Access Code. But again, we have a lot of engines here, including the Mathmex. But the Salamangreat's ability to use Sunlight Wolf and then set up the Omni-Negate counter trap is pretty good. It's just not quite good enough, I don't think, in a meta like this. Plus, again, I kind of just find Salads to be a little bit boring. Like, I like busting them out like every now and then, but not very consistently, honestly. Okay, Branded Eldritch. So Eldritch in particular is struggling a lot, and actually has been for quite a while, for a number of reasons. Initially, Eldritch really started to struggle when the Runic cards first came out, and we saw this in a lot of, meta reports and, just Master Duel lists that were doing well at the time, that as soon as Runics came out, they immediately ousted Eldritch as the stun deck of choice, and one of the reasons is because of Runic's ability to banish cards from the deck. You would often end up banishing their Golden Lords, which made it difficult to recover. It wasn't too long, it wasn't right after by any means, but it wasn't too long after that before we started to see the Ishizu cards get released. And, that whole time between then, Runic was still just the stun deck of choice, just because, again, it just countered Eldritch so well. But once the Ishizu cards came out, then it became a lot more difficult for Eldritch to really get its footing in the meta, just because of their ability to, of course, the shufflers put back Eldritch to Golden Lord. Also, any of these spell and trap cards that get sent to the graveyard, any of the Eldritch ones, if they're not in the graveyard, then, like during the end phase, for example, the trap cards won't be able to set up the Eldelixir cards from the deck. So, for those reasons, we really haven't seen Eldritch do too much recently. If I'm going to play Eldritch, now I'm definitely going to at least try to make it a little bit interesting, right? I am playing Floodgates, although I actually don't have Tickboos, which is, short for there can be only one. Of course, I always forget that Master Duel search function will pull up like everything, but yeah, you can see here, I don't own any copies of this card, and frankly, I don't really plan on crafting it because I'm just not particularly interested in stun decks personally. But in a deck like this, at least we're doing somewhat interesting stuff with, the zombie package, like Zombie World, and, playing 60 cards. But again, it's a list I'm not super dedicated to crafting, 2 more Ultras for. So I'm just playing a playset of Summon Limits here to kind of round out the deck list. Extra deck is wide open, of course, so we're just jamming in a bunch of branded stuff because we're also playing that in order to potentially spice up the list here a little bit as well. I've actually done a deck profile for this, a few months ago, but again, just in this meta, I think between, of course, the Ishizu Shufflers, General Graveyard Hate, and if you're going to play a stun deck, there are definitely better options. I just kind of have a hard time, I don't know, wanting to play a deck like this. Alright, Adventure Prank Kids. So this is a deck that, pretty much everybody just wrote off as soon as Meow Meow Moo went to 1. Well, Meow Meow Moo and, of course, the Water Enchantress, but I maintain that this deck was actually fine for quite a while, even after these cards got limited. I think particularly after Meow Meow Moo went to 1, everyone was done with Adventure Pranks, and indeed the deck did suffer as a result, but like I said, I think the deck was actually fine for quite a while. Now I think it's honestly just as a whole been power crept out of the format, right? In Master Duel's initial formats, and then of course when the Adventure package came along, ending on Battle Butler was a big deal. The potential to double Raigeki board wipe your opponent was really good. But of course now, especially in this particular meta, where a bunch of card effects trigger by, being sent to the graveyard by card effect, this effect isn't particularly impressive. But like a few decks down here, towards these kind of bottom decks I have, it's really more of a case of even before Tears came along, this deck was already power crept. In a lot of ways, Meow Meow Moon to 1 is one of those limits that, like, it might have been necessary, but even if it was, it would have been necessary for, like, maybe only a month. But, you know, it's kind of hard to walk back a limit like that after only 1 month. But at the same time, maybe it was enough to just, you know, put the Water Enchantress and Fusion Destiny was at the time at 1, but is, of course, now at 2. Honestly, it feels like Meow Meow Moo could come back to 3, and Adventure Pranks, or just Prank Kids in general, would still probably just be a rogue deck. Like, again, I think the deck is not quite fully power crept out of the format, but, I mean, you know, again, their main boss monster, Battle Butler, is just not particularly great against Tearlaments, and in addition to that, you know, the meta has, like I said, I really do think it has just kind of been power crept out, so... this particular build, we are foregoing any kind of like DPE package. Instead, we're opting for a couple of Nemesis Corridors and we're rocking the Thunder Dragon Colossus. But I haven't actually, you know, tried this deck out. That's going to be the case for a few of these decks towards like the bottom here. I actually haven't really played them yet. I just kind of have them built, and I don't know, maybe if I feel like it, I'll come back to them. But no promises on some of these lists here. Branded Dragon Maid. I don't think I actually ever ended up covering this deck. I know we covered Dragon Maid like when the structure deck first came out, but I don't think I've really done it much since then. Branded Dragon Maid, particularly when the Branded Fusion support first came out, was actually a very solid rogue pick for a while. Basically, the idea is that you can use your Branded Fusion to go into the Albion using the Stacia the Roman. That will, of course, allow you to set up the Predoplant name I can't pronounce in the graveyard, but then that allows you to go into Mirror Jade. And then in addition to that, if you also have a Chamber Dragon Maid, you can end up sending the Changeover and then using that to go into using the or not the Predoplant, but using rather the Albion, you can go into a Shiyu. The combo, I'm struggling to remember exactly how it goes off the top of my head, but I know if you open like Chamber Dragon Maid plus Branded Fusion, you can end on the Dragon Maid Shiyu, which is an Omni Negate, as well as the Mirror Jade there. So it's another very interesting variant of Branded. But I will say, I've already been playing just regular Branded Despia. Well, I mean, it's 60 cards, but when I say regular, I mean it doesn't have Tearlaments in it. And even that kind of like is... It's definitely a struggle. Like, it's not like impossible to play or do well with. In fact, I have climbed ranks in Diamond with the Branded Despia deck, but I guess what I'm getting at here is like it's already kind of a struggle to play like an optimized Branded Despia deck, so it becomes a little more difficult to justify something more gimmicky like Branded Dragon Maid. But if you really want to play Dragon Maid, I do think a list like this is the way to go. It's also similar to how I feel about Branded Eldritch. Again, if you're going to be playing branded stuff, I think it's just best to go with a more optimized route, especially in a meta like this where you're fighting just to, you know, keep your head above water when you're off against Tearlaments. This is probably one of my least favorite decks that I have personally built on here. This is exactly what it looks like. It's just an Ishizu Runic Stun deck. Again, don't have There Can Be Only One, so I just have 3 summon limits instead, because I don't really ever plan on playing this deck pretty much ever. Although, a couple of notable things here that we do have is the Exchange of the Spirit along with the Gravekeeper's Trap that will allow us to, of course, have the Graveyard Lock against the Tearlaments deck. And this is yet another deck where you can actually end up slotting in the Nemesis Corridor and potentially sneaking out a free Thunder Dragon Colossus every now and then. You just have to activate, of course, the Nemesis Corridor effects from your hand, and that will satisfy the condition for the Colossus here. So, yeah, I don't think a lot of you want to see this list anytime soon, but I'm just going to warn you now, don't expect to see this list. It's really in here just so I can say, like, alright, if you really want to see how I would build a stun deck in this meta, here's a stun deck. I'm just personally, again, not a fan of them. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to play a stun deck. I have played them a lot in the past in the TCG, but on Master Duel, I definitely prefer more, like, kind of, I guess, combo-oriented decks, so... Alright, there is the first row there. Now let's go over to Dark Magician. I know I'm going to get at least one comment, like, really asking me to play this, and maybe once I hit Diamond 1, but I gotta be honest, I'm, like, not a huge fan of Dark Magician as a deck, which I know might sound blasphemous. Dark Magician alongside Blue Eyes is pretty much the poster child of the whole game, but I just don't think Dark Magician decks are particularly interesting, like, I'll be frank. In this meta in particular, they're kind of known for being like very floodgatey, and indeed, we are playing a set of Soul Drain. The Dark Magician deck does actually use the graveyard a decent bit. Like, it's enough that we can get away with playing Shifter, but not like Dimensional Fissure and or Macro. Soul Drain is a nice compromise if you're looking for something like Macro, but still need like, you know, some amount of your graveyard. You can use Soul Drain, and that will stop the monster effects in the graveyard from activating, but you can still like move cards out of the graveyard. If specifically like Necro Valley doesn't work for you because of your strategy. Again, just because it's Dark Magician, I know I'm going to ask, somebody's going to ask me to play this. I've actually never played a Dark Magician deck. I really just got the 3 structure decks just to have my playset of Magician Souls and Illusion of Chaos, but, you know, I figured since I had all the stuff from the decks, there's no reason not to throw some kind of a list together. This list is kind of just from what I was looking at on, like, Master Duel meta, and some other deck profiles, you know, here and there on, like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro Deck, and I think maybe I saw one on YouTube. I didn't do too much research for Dark Magicians, just because, again, I'm honestly not super particularly interested in them. You don't have to run, like, the Floodgate stuff, including the Secret Villages, but really the reason that we're playing it in a list like this is just so that we, and also Shifter, of course, as well, is just so that we can actually, like, keep up with the meta in some way, shape, or form, because Dark Magician, unlike Blue Eyes, which actually was, like, kind of meta-relevant at one point, although it was a very manufactured meta, it was the 2016 Worlds meta, Dark Magician has never been, like, as to my knowledge, beyond Rogue tier, so, I don't know, and again, it's just a strategy I'm not super interested in myself, but not an awful deck by any means, not by any means at all. Alright, Runic Sprite. So this is a list I know that, again, it's got Runic in it, so I'm sure a lot of people are going to shudder as soon as they see this. Runic Sprite is very much one of those decks that has just completely been outclassed by other stuff in the meta, namely the Ishizu cards. This is going to, of course, be a bit of a running theme here in some of these decks, is just how the Ishizu and or tier limit cards have ended up just either directly countering them out of the meta or power creeping them out of the meta. Runics in general get very hurt by the Ishizu shufflers, and Runic Sprite, especially when you consider how much like pure Sprite can actually be built against the meta because of how little cards its engine uses. Runic Sprite is another one of those cases where, you know, kind of similar to DDDs in a way. Just the fact that the Runic and the Sprite cards individually already take up so much of the deck space, you can't ever really build this deck with too many techs to like specifically hard counter the meta. That combined with the fact that the best tier 0 deck is already playing, like already has the ability to hard counter, you know, this deck, and we can definitely see why Runic Sprite has taken a very big fall from grace from when it was initially big. You know, there was a moment where this was like not anywhere near the level that tier limit was being played, but you know, like it was hovering around like 20-25% from what I remember, so that's a fairly large representation, but again, of course, still nothing in comparison to tier limits. Labyrinth is going to be the next deck, and it's one of those decks that honestly is just incomplete at this point. Like, I do have a list here of 40 fully crafted cards that you could use, and that's going to be the case for all these decks. I don't have any decks. I don't like building decks that you can't just like pick up and play. I like having a lot of decks, and I like having the ability to play any of them at any given time. This list, I will say, definitely is lacking Lord of the Heavenly Prison, which for those who don't know is going to be... go down here and find it. Here we go. Lord of the Heavenly Prison, this card. I actually do not have any copies of this card. I haven't crafted any. Much like there can be only one, it's mostly used in like either stun or very back row heavy strategies, and those tend not to be the decks that I tend to favor in Master Duel. So yeah, if I had a playset of this and also maybe one other lovely Labyrinth, although you only need one copy, it's also not bad to have two, then I definitely think this list would be looking a lot more optimized. I will say, whenever we get more Labyrinth support, I am definitely not opposed to trying that out, and, you know, that would definitely boost the power of this deck. But here it is in its current stage. Again, as you can see, we're playing the Dimensional Fissures, Dimensional Shifters for anti-tier stuff, also Soul Drains for anti-tier stuff, although one card you could play, and I actually do play this in another list we're going to see, instead of Soul Drain, is Different Dimension Ground, and the reason you would want to play this over Soul Drain is because it's searchable by Trap Trick. Though to be fair, if you're looking for a way to counter tiers that's searchable by Trap Trick, we're also main decking a couple of copies of Dimensional Barrier as well. Dimensional Barrier is not a card I don't think even in Labyrinth I would normally main deck, but you know, when again about 60% of the meta is all fusion decks, it ends up becoming pretty good. So this is definitely one of those decks that is very much built to take on Tearlaments and take them down, but unlike a lot of decks where if you try to jam too many meta counters into them, they're actually not as effective. This is one of those decks that can definitely host quite a bit of those counters and still operate very well. Alright, so Floowandereeze is going to be next. This is actually a very, very good deck, and you might notice that I have it like pretty far down here. If we're only looking in terms of like how good it is, like as far as the meta power level goes, then Floowandereeze should absolutely be like, you know, way, I guess I end up changing a couple of cards in these, so now they're up here. But, you know, they would be up here, you know, Floowandereeze should be up here next to, like, Ishizu Tearlaments, right? But Floowandereeze is really down here for me for two main reasons, and they're kind of, like, you know, interconnected reasons. The first reason is that I actually don't have any copies of the Advent of Adventure. This Floowandereeze, of course, the searching quick play spell card, because I didn't pull for any copies of it, or any, I didn't open any packs of Cosmic Ocean, so that was the pack that this card was in. And beyond that, then the second reason that this card, or this deck is kind of far down is like, it's just, again, not a deck that particularly interests me. I do think Floowandereeze is kind of cool, and I'm not, like, inherently opposed to, like, ever playing it. But I will say that, oh, actually, I don't have a Sylvan Princess sprite anymore. Well, I'll just have to find another random rank one. You could really throw any extra deck monster in here, it doesn't particularly matter, but, yeah, I don't know. There's not a lot to say about Floowandereeze, honestly, because I don't have a whole lot of experience with the deck, and it's not what I particularly planned on playing. But I'm not opposed to trying it, and of, like, the anti-meta decks, I do think Floowandereeze is definitely cooler than, like, stun decks. Like, I would be more interested in playing Flow than something like, you know, just, again, any given stun deck. But also another problem with Flow is that I think once tiers end up inevitably getting hit very hard by the ban list, it becomes a lot more difficult for this deck to stay relevant. I could be wrong about that, but I just know that looking at future metas beyond Tearlaments and like the TCG and OCG, we definitely see a drop-off of Flow, more so in the OCG than the TCG, because in the TCG, map is at 3, and the OCG end here on Master Duel, map is at 1, and I think the fact that map is at 1 is going to severely limit what this deck can do moving forward until it goes back up to 3, so... I'm just going to discard the changes. I'll just worry about that later. Okay, Zoodiac is going to be the next deck we're going to take a look at here. This is another kind of like anti-meta deck, or another deck that can naturally slot in a lot of these anti-tier tools, like DD Crows, like Dimensional Fissures, so on and so forth. Of course, the Dimension Shifter, once again, makes an appearance here. It's a rank 4 base deck, although it doesn't typically exceed someone with 2 level 4 monsters. It can, so we do have Abyss Dweller, but for the most part, I mean, this is a... It's just Zoodiac stuff with a bunch of anti-meta stuff kind of jammed in. I do like Zoodiacs a fair bit, so kind of similar to Flow, if I was going to play some sort of anti-meta deck, I think it would probably be Zoodiacs. Extra deck is probably missing the, what is the Link 4, or Link 3, the Link 3 Machine Monster. We've seen Numeron summon it, that uses 3 Xyz monsters as Link materials. I just can't remember the name off the top of my head. Ideally, if I had a copy, I would play that over the Jewel Driver Vespinato, but I definitely don't think it's, like, required for this deck. Like, if you wanted to play a list that looked more like this, you could definitely get away with that. And this is actually kind of a budget-friendly anti-meta deck. It's got a few URs, it's got, like, you know, the F-Zero, but really, like, F-Zero isn't 100% necessary, neither is Dweller. Well, I mean, Dweller, I would argue, in this meta is necessary just in general as a staple, but... you know, beyond, like, F-Zero and, of course, the namesake Drident, it really just plays a bunch of staple URs, like the Zeus, like, pretty much just, yeah, Ash Blossoms, Maxis, Dimension Shifters, if you consider those staples. Triple Tech, I definitely consider a staple, especially in this meta, and then Callbys and Imperms, so relatively budget deck if you've already got a decent staple collection. Alright, I am taking a little bit longer than I'd like to here, so I'm going to try to go a little more quickly here. It'll be more relevant, especially as we go to more meta decks that we're more familiar with, or I've already covered, and or will cover soon. So, This is Adventure Punk Phantom Knight. If I was going to play an Adventure Phantom Knight list, this is probably what it would look like. We have the DPE engine is in here as well. Of course, you can see that right here. It's basically very similar to a lot of our Adventure Phantom Knight lists we've used in the past, but we're now jamming in the Chaos Ruler and, of course, the Punk engine as well. Xeamine being level 3 makes it a very natural fit. We do have Dogda and Scythe for some extra locking as well. This deck has a decent shot against Tearlament, but it's one of those ones where I haven't really bothered to try to fit in too many like natural counters. I could, see myself slotting in some like DD Crows maybe, but at the same time, this deck is one where you really want to be more focused on your game plan than on like hard countering your opponent. So I've left it mostly alone in that regard. I know one comment in particular was asking about Tearlament's Phantom Knights, which I've actually got right here. This is a Phantom Knights variant that I might actually try on the channel in the future at some point. I haven't played it. I actually haven't played it yet, and I'm a little bit curious about how it operates. I found this list, or a list similar to this. I don't think it was this exact list, but I found a list very similar to this on Master Duel meta, and thought it was neat. The Phantom Knights cards are all dark, so that slots in very nicely with fusing for like Mud Dragon, for example, or for like Dragostapelia. The tier extra deck is notoriously wide open, so we have a ton of room for just general rank 3 stuff. We have the ability to OTK with Arc Rebellion Dragon. Yeah, I mean, it just seems like a pretty cool list. Oh, and then we can also, if we really desperately need to fuse, we can actually send Havnus with the Cherubini. I don't really know what situation you would be in where you would have to do it that way, but it's cool that you can. So, I don't know. This might be like a mid-season after I've hit Diamond 1 deck profile, if a lot of people are interested in this, or if I just am curious about it, which I am, admittedly. There's a very good chance I'll end up coming back to this at some point. Next up is Mathmech. Oh, Mathmech, my beloved. I really do like Mathmech quite a bit. I loved the meta. Of course, we looked at our past Master Duel formats tier list recently, and I had as my favorite meta Master Duel has ever been in. I had the Mathmech meta, just because the meta as a whole was so wide open, and all of the tier 1 decks, including Mathmech, felt relatively fair, right, to face up against. This is such a cool deck, and I so wish it was better than it is right now. We're really only playing Nibiru in this list for Small World purposes. Actually, I don't even know if we need Nibiru for Small World anymore. I just know, as I've said many times on the channel, and this is even true when including DD Crow still, that between Valor, Gachiri, Adagnister, and Nibiru, you can search for any monster with any other monster with Small World. Those 3 cards are honestly not only just pretty solid in their own right, but between the 3 of them make Small World just a universal searcher, which is so good in this deck. But alas, Ishizu Shufflers, this is yet another deck that is just severely messed up by their presence in the meta. The sad thing is, too, is even if the Ishizu Shufflers get dealt with like relatively soon, there's still going to be Bestials in the future, which specialize in banishing light and dark monsters from the opponent's graveyard, which, yeah, it's not good. It's just not good. I have actually seen Mathmech been doing recently well in the TCG, and I think the OCG a little bit too, so it's not like this deck is just dead forever, but in Master Duel in particular, it's going to have a bit of a rough time for a little while. I think it's only starting to do well because I believe in both formats, don't quote me on this, they've hit like some amount of the Bestial cards that are more prominent and more like easily splashed, so. Alright, there's Mathmech. Now we're going to go into a couple of sprite variants. We have Tri-Sprite here. Not a whole lot has changed, although we have incorporated the Melfi package because they are beasts and because it's a, 2 cards in the main deck, 2 cards in the extra deck package. It's not really like you have to devote a whole lot of room to it. Pretty much any sprite variant can probably make room for them. And here in Tri-Sprite, their typing ends up being very relevant. So I thought it amiss to not include them. Would have included more DD Crows as well if I had room for them, because its typing is, again, relevant to Tri-Brigades as a whole. And as we've been seeing throughout these lists, DD Crow ends up being a pretty good tier limit counter that's very easy to slot in if your deck has room for it. Otherwise, though, yeah, it's pretty much just, more Tri-Brigade Sprite stuff going on here. This deck actually doesn't feel particularly great. I think among Sprite variants, aside from, like, Runic Sprite, I'd probably rather go for, like, Melfi or Pure Sprite over something like Tri-Sprite. Just because I think those are more apt, I guess, in this current format for doing well. The same is mostly true for our other variant of Sprite here that we're going to see as well, Live Twin Sprite. This one, as you can see, I do have room for 3 DD Crows as well as 3 Triple Tack. These are 2 of the more common things I like to play in this meta. Triple Tack isn't like a direct counter to Tearlaments. It's not like it banishes or shuffles back cards in the graveyard in that regard, but Tearlaments are of course notorious for playing on both players' turns very often. So it's live against Tears a lot, and taking one of their monsters can actually be enough to completely make their board irrelevant in the right circumstance. And it's also just generally a good card against like Maxi and other hand traps as well. So I like to include it where I can here. Last time we had Twin Sprite, I didn't have any of the extra locking stuff. This time around, I did put the Scythe and of course the Dogda as well, back into the deck here, just to, again, have something to fight against Tearlaments. There's a lot of instances where I'm not, against pulling out something like Scythe if it means giving myself a better tier matchup, even if I don't always think it's optimal. And in Twin Sprite, it's not really optimal a lot of the time to go out of your way to go for Scythe, but again, it just often becomes necessary to keep up in a meta like this. Alright, next up we have Sky Striker. This is another list where, again, the engine in the package is relatively small, so you end up being able to fit in a lot of anti-meta stuff. We are, once again, playing 3 DD Crow and 3 Triple Tack. This is the other deck I mentioned that can actually make use of Different Dimension Ground. This deck in particular wants to use Different Dimension Ground because it can't really make very effective use of stuff like Dimension Fissure, Macrocosmos, Soul Drain, Necro Valley, because Sky Striker is a fairly graveyard-centric deck, right? Like, it wants Ray to be in the graveyard, and it really thrives from Ray being in the graveyard, so Dimension Fissure is kind of out of the question in that regard. And on top of that, it also really needs spell cards in the graveyard, so stuff like Macro isn't really feasible. Ray likes to move out of the graveyard. That makes, like, Soul Drain, or not Soul Drain, Necro Valley, not really that great. And then Soul Drain, again, negating our own Ray. Ray, of course, just having this in the graveyard is so valuable to Sky Striker. But what Different Dimension Ground offers is just one turn of monsters being banished, which is usually fine. So this is our kind of like tier counter, and indeed this can be another card to look to if you're in a situation where you're playing Sky Strikers or a similar deck where you can't really afford to be playing Necro Valley, Soul Drain, Dimensional Fissure, or Macro. This could be a potential counter, but I really don't like suggesting cards like this unless you're playing a deck where like you just have a wide open main deck like Sky Strikers. I don't think most decks can afford to fit in a playset of Different Dimension Ground. You can even make an argument for this deck not really having the room, and it might not even be optimal, but I don't know. Again, that's just kind of the meta we're in, where a lot of the times if you have the space and you would normally devote that space to playing just general good stuff against, like, a variety of decks, like, maybe Ghost Ogres or Ghost Bells, so on and so forth. Again, we're just having these, like, hard counter to Tearlaments because we know they're just going to show up everywhere. Alright, Zombies. I like this deck quite a bit. I could definitely see myself coming back to this very soon. I like zombie decks in general. Big 60-card zombie piles. I did a deck profile on this last season. The main attraction for this deck is its ability to summon Scythe, although we don't use Dogda to do it in this deck. We use sometimes Baron, but mostly the Red Eyes Zombie Dragon Lord. Both have the ability to summon a monster out of our graveyard during our opponent's turns. Baron can summon any monster. The Zombie Dragon Lord summons specifically a zombie, but of course while Zombie World is in play, the artifact Scythe in our graveyard is a zombie. So that's very nice there. Yeah, I just love pile decks in general. If you've watched me for quite a while, then you know that pile decks do tend to be my favorites, and the zombie pile decks in particular are just, like, so much fun. I think they're so cool. So I would definitely expect to see this come up at some point in the near future. Probably this season, but if not, again, just sometime soon. Oh, the other main appeal is the Braver package. It's really easy to make a level 9 Synchro in this deck thanks to Unizombie, so we're able to play the Braver package with the ability to hand rip with the Smoke Grenade here as well, so that's pretty rad. Alright, just a couple more rows here of decks. This I just call in Shizu Tearlaments Pile. This I guess is more close to what you would think of like Casino tiers, because we're playing like, you know, some of the dangers and stuff here. I actually should have some Danger Mothman in this deck, now that I think about it. I opted for a small Thunder Dragon package, just to like have the ability to go into Colossus. I think Colossus is potentially pretty good in this meta, if your deck can summon it. But I will say this in general about like 60 card Shizu Tearlament decks. You've probably already heard this from other people or just know it in general, but Tearlaments you definitely want to be in like a 40 card deck. You might think like, oh, Grass, Tearlament's like getting milled, why wouldn't you go 60 cards? Well, we don't want to mill like all of our Tearlament names all at the same time. That's not good. It's very rare that that's actually like a good play to like activate all three at once. And beyond that, excuse me, adding 20 cards just to like sometimes mill a bunch of cards, which a lot of the time you don't even necessarily want to do, it's just, it does not bode well for consistency for the deck. So in general, yeah, I don't really think that like 60 card Tearlament decks are where it's at, but that's not to say that they're all bad or that they can't be good. I think just about any deck that's got a, you know, decent Tearlament engine in it is gonna have some amount of success in this meta. But this is one that's like, it's fine. I don't think I'm gonna try it anytime soon, but it's like, you know, it's a fine list. So, Melfi Sprite. This is a deck I've already featured a couple of times on the channel. In particular, like, I managed to put the Kalantosa back in so that we could have that for future plays. And, yeah, beyond that, I haven't made too many changes to the deck from last time I showed it. I think that's actually the only change I've made. It's just that one card difference. I'm not playing Rescue Cat anymore. I don't remember if I was in the last iteration, but I was for a little bit. But no more Rescue Cat. It's a little bit win more anyway. It just ends up going into a gigantic sprite, so it's like, and it's very easily stopped and negatable. So ultimately just decided to take it out of the list there. Alright, here we have Branded Despia, and this is a 60 card list, but as you can see, it is absent of Tearlament cards. I have actually separated two specific Branded Despia lists, one with tiers, one without. Expect to see this list without Tearlaments in a deck profile coming up very soon here, like within the next couple of days on the channel. This is actually the last deck I was playing on ladder. It took me up from Diamond 5 to Diamond 4 after, I don't know, maybe like a dozen, maybe 15 games or so. It felt fine, you know. It's like, you know, it's Branded Despia. It's still just doing Branded Despia stuff. Going first against Tearlaments is really nice because you can use Mirror Jade to banish and control a lot of their board in that regard. Going second can be a little bit more rough, but we do have some tools to help us out here. I would love to squeeze in a third Imperm, but I really don't know if I have the room in this list. I know I could be cutting stuff like, you know, maybe the Theater or the Ad Libitum, or not Ad Libitum, not Ad Libitum, I meant to click Albion. And or Retribution. Maybe we don't need the Comedy, but that's one reason I like going for 60 cards in Branded Despia, is to fit in all that stuff. But I'm going to talk more about this list in a very soon upcoming deck profile. This is my branded list with Tearlaments. As you can see, we're 40 cards, not 60 here. Again, I think if you're going to be like a dedicated non-pile Tearlament deck, you should probably just be at 40 cards. This, though, I don't really think is much better at all than... or I don't think it's really any better than like regular Shizu Tearlaments. Basically, we've just ended up foregoing tech and or anti-meta, or not anti-meta, like disruption stuff, like triple tech, DD Crows, Ash Blossoms, and Imperms, just to slot in the, you know, branded package into a Shizu Tearlaments. It's fine. I don't know. It is nice to be able to make Tearlament stuff and then also like throw a Mirror Jade on it, but I don't think it's necessarily any better than, you know, a Shizu Tearlaments. And really, if I was looking to play Branded Despia, I would play a more dedicated Branded Despia deck. Sword Souls is another deck I'm actually covering very soon. I think it'll probably be like Despia either tomorrow or the day after. So I won't talk too much about Sword Souls in this video just because I'm about to do it I'm literally about to do it right after I record this video, but again, we have 2 DD Crows, we have 3 Triple Tactics talent. Beyond that, it's not really too different. One thing I will say is that if I was really going to lean into playing Sword Souls in this meta, I would absolutely craft and play a second, and maybe I would want to do more testing, but maybe even a third Protos. Protos is actually a very nice natural counter to Tearlaments because, well, you just summon it, call Dark, it doesn't blow itself up, and then your opponent can't special summon Dark monsters, which means they can't special summon Kitkalos or Kaleidoheart, or of course any of their Tearlament monsters. It's really going to make their only play, their only option is to like make a rank 4 play, and if that's their only avenue, the deck becomes much easier to counter. But again, we'll talk more about that when we actually cover our Sword Soul deck profile. Here we have Sprite. This is the list I already covered a couple of days ago. The one that I got a 15-game win streak with last week. I still like it. It's very solid. Yeah, I don't really know if there's much more I need to say about it. If you want to hear and see in more detail about this Sprite list, then definitely feel free to check out my deck profile on it from a couple of days ago. Let's see. We also have, I think just, again, very recently, did a deck profile for Madolche. Again, because it's recent, not going to say too much here. Again, if you want to see a more dedicated video about it, I have a dedicated video about it. Feel free to check it out on my channel. It's actually going to be the case for these last 2 decks as well. Adamancipator, sound like a broken record here, but I actually just did a deck profile dedicated specifically to this list. Feel free to check that out. It was posted just very recently, within the last day or 2, here on the channel. I will talk a little bit though about my Ishizu Tearlament list, because this I have actually changed up a little bit since the deck profile. So it's just a 2-card difference in the main deck. Extra deck is still exactly the same. A couple card difference in the main deck though. So I took out my 3rd Triple Tack and put in Reinforcement of the Army. I'm actually playing the Reinforcement of the Army in addition to Foolish Burial Goods. And the reason that I'm doing it this way is to give myself more consistency. You know, with Instant Fusion gone, that's like, you know, one less, like, 1-card opener than we've had before. So, I've ultimately just decided to go ahead and throw in the Rhoda as well as Foolish Burial Goods to get to the Rhino Heart more often. Because Rhino Heart is just like a 1-card play, like it's your in to making Kitkalos and then setting up your plays with only 1 normal summon 1 card. So, the more ways you have to that, the better. Triple Tack is a good card, but it's also not always live, so just cutting down from 2 to 3 copies. Also ended up putting back in the 3rd Tearlament Scream, and I took out DD Crow for it. DD Crow, the random one of, I just thought was kind of mid. I didn't really like only having 1 copy of it. Didn't really come up often. It really never came up fusing for Mud Dragon. Even when I was playing 3 DD Crow, I only really fused for Mud Dragon using DD Crow like maybe 2, 3, just a handful. I don't remember exactly how many, but probably a literal handful of times. It just doesn't really come up super often. And even then, it's just for the convenience sake of making a rank 4 play. So I don't really miss DD Crow at all. I think Ash Blossom is way better. Once again, shout out to Borclose for the suggestion when I hopped onto one of her streams, and she was talking about her list and talked about how good Ash Blossom is, not just against Tearlaments, but against the meta as a whole. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. It's a lot easier to use and a lot better in a lot more situations than DD Crow is. So there are my lists. Oh, wow, we're at like almost 45 minutes on my recording. So yeah, those are all my different deck lists. Again, if you're interested in any one of these decks in particular, you know, the list is up, and if not a dedicated deck profile, I was at least able to show the list that I have currently now. So I think that's going to go ahead and do it for this one. Let's go ahead and move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There, for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack, you'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation, you do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now, so without further ado, this is Hexlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.